From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I recommended to my chain of command that we continue the drawdown of the surge combat forces, and that upon the withdrawal of the last surge brigade combat team in July, we undertake a 45-day period of consolidation and evaluation.
General David Petraeus, the top military commander in Iraq, testifies on Capitol Hill. He recommends leaving more U.S. troops in Iraq than before the so-called surge. He was testifying alongside Ambassador Ryan Crocker. They were questioned by all three presidential candidates. We'll play highlights and host a debate with Arun Gupta of The Independent, Gareth Porter of Interpress Service, and Eli Lake of the New York Sun. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The top U.S. military commander in Iraq, General David Petraeus, is calling for an end to U.S. troop withdrawals after July. Appearing before two Senate committees alongside U.S. Ambassador Ryan Crocker, General Petraeus said troops need to stay in Iraq to protect what he called the gains of the so-called surge. Petraeus told lawmakers the security situation in Iraq has improved since last year's buildup of troops, but said the gains are fragile and reversible.
As events in the past 2 weeks have reminded us, and as I have repeatedly cautioned, the progress made since last spring is fragile and reversible. Still, security in Iraq is better than it was when Ambassador Crocker and I reported to you last September, and it is significantly better than it was 15 months ago when Iraq was on the brink of civil war and the decision was made to deploy additional forces to Iraq.
Petraeus' plan would leave 140,000 U.S. troops in Iraq, more than before the so-called surge. On the eve of Petraeus' testimony, Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr said he was calling off a million-man protest today to mark the 5th anniversary of the fall of Baghdad to U.S. troops. In a statement read by spokesperson Salah al-Aoubidi, Sadr said he feared the U.S. and Iraqi military would crack down on the protests.
I
call those beloved Iraqi people who wish to demonstrate against the occupation to postpone their march, out of my fear for them and my concern to spare their blood.
Before Sadr's cancellation, Iraqi forces had set up dozens of checkpoints to block followers from attending the rally. Sadr also renewed his threat to lift a 6-month freeze on his group's military activities. The freeze had been credited with a drop in violence around Iraq until the most recent U.S.-Iraqi offensive. Clashes continue between Shia fighters and U.S.-Iraqi forces in Baghdad. Dozens of fighters and 12 U.S. troops have been killed across Iraq since Sunday. U.S. attacks on Iraqi civilians are also on the rise. An unknown number of civilians were killed in Sadr City Monday when U.S. warplanes bombed a street area. A witness said the U.S. military attacked again after civilians had gathered at the scene.
I was heading to Zain el Abidin Mosque for prayer when the warplanes attacked. When people gathered at the scene of the attack, the warplanes bombed them again. There were many casualties. What did those people do?
We'll have more on Iraq and Tuesday's Senate testimony after headlines. A new study shows members of Congress have collectively invested as much as $196 million in military companies under contract with the Pentagon. The Center for Responsive Politics says the holdings could pose a conflict of interest for lawmakers deciding on spending for the Iraq War. More Republicans had military investments than Democrats, but Democrats have more money at stake. The highest stakeholder is Democratic Senator John Kerry. He made at least $2.6 million from his investments between 2004 and 2006. He has up to $38 million invested in companies doing business with the Pentagon. In Haiti, rioting continues over the rising cost of food. On Tuesday, hundreds of people stormed the National Palace in Port-au-Prince. United Nations forces fired tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse the crowd. Prices of staples, including rice, beans, and fruit, have increased 50% over the past year. Protester Jean Alix said the situation has become untenable.
We can't accept the situation we're in. People can't send their children to school. They can't do anything for them. We have come to get President Preval to join us and to see what he has decided to do. We can't go on any longer.
Haiti's most vulnerable have resorted to eating dirt to try to ease their hunger. At least 5 people have died since the protests erupted last week. In San Francisco, thousands of people gathered Tuesday to protest China's treatment of the Tibetan struggle. The vigil came hours before the Olympic flame of this summer's Beijing Olympics arrived in town for its only North American stop. At a news conference, the former South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu said he did not support an Olympic boycott, but urged world leaders not to attend the opening ceremony.
We're not at the moment calling for a boycott of the games because, I mean, the athletes have spent a lot of time preparing, and you don't want to penalize them unnecessarily. But I'm certainly calling on heads of state not to attend the opening ceremony, to register their disapproval, their disgust, really.
Several human rights groups have mobilized in San Francisco this week to also call attention to China's policies in Burma and Darfur. The actor Richard Gere also spoke.
This all started on March 10th, and it didn't start about the Olympics. You know, there was a simple demonstration in front of the Jokhang Cathedral, and a vortex opened up. An enormous amount of energy came out of that, and it's played into this moment, obviously, around the Olympics. But I think what is so extraordinary is it was spontaneous. It was an expression of a people who finally couldn't take it anymore.
Tibet has been under military lockdown for the past month since Buddhist monks began protesting Chinese occupation. In environmental news, a new study says the American West is warming up at a higher level than the rest of the world. According to the Rocky Mountain Climate Organization, temperatures in the Colorado River are now more than double the average global temperature rise. The White House has rejected a bipartisan Senate proposal to address the nation's housing crisis. The $15 billion measure included a significant Democrat concession, dropping a proposal to allow bankruptcy judges to modify mortgage rates in individual cases. Critics had said the measure would have mostly benefited the home building industry while offering little to millions of homeowners facing foreclosure. But on Tuesday, the White House said the plan still goes too far in aiding homeowners who failed to pay their loans. And the New York Times is reporting the Justice Department has avoided prosecuting more than 50 major corporations accused of wrongdoing over the past 3 years. The decline in prosecutions is seen as a deliberate and dramatic shift in policy. Rather than take companies to court for high-profile cases, the Bush administration has relied on deferred prosecution agreements that impose fines and appoint an outside monitor to enforce internal changes at the company involved. The outside monitoring came under scrutiny this year after it was revealed that former Attorney General John Ashcroft's consulting firm won a $50 million government contract to oversee an agreement. Terms of the deals are often kept secret. Companies recently avoiding prosecutions include Monsanto, American Express, and Merrill Lynch. Legal experts say the deferred prosecutions may encourage companies to commit wrongdoing, knowing they'll likely be able to avoid a costly and public trial if they're caught. Experts also say the agreements could become even more prevalent as the Justice Department takes on companies accused of wrongdoing in the subprime mortgage crisis. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.